Hello, today we're going to look at as and like, and we're going to follow Fowler, and the entries are rather long, so brace yourselves. We'll get started with as, and the entry for as gets started with a question of case, right? And this is something I think we have mentioned already in class. The example here is, he is as clever as I or as clever as he. Um, well, initially, this will revolve around the question that as is a conjunction, though here we started off with as a preposition, right? As is a conjunction, though it can function as a preposition as well. And because of that, it should be followed by the nominative case, right? As she, right? Now, there's a lot to be said, and of course, you can get into the entry here in the dictionary to get to the difference between as and like, yes, which is basically some of what we will be doing today together. Um, okay, now I go back to the notes, and I would like to go back to, I'm changing to page 69 now. And Fowler here discusses the potential ambiguity between he loves me as much as my sister. This is the first column, right? And I think that was a very good example, because we may interpret it as, when we say he loves me as much as my sister, this could be as much as my sister does. So my sister and he love me in the same way or the same amount. Or we might interpret he loves me as much as my sister, meaning as much as he loves my sister. So he loves my sister and I equally, right? So the same amount of love. So that's a very good way of interpreting or seeing a problem in ambiguity in the use of as. Now, we can use as it says here. Remember, I'm following Fowler, not these notes, right? We'll go back to these notes anyway. We can use as in the capacity of, right? So it is as a historian that he is best known. She is employed as a nanny. And in this case, as becomes a preposition, right? So that's a different use, right? Now she works as a courier, treat me as a friend, I respect him as a doctor, and so on and so forth. Now, this brings the problem or the difference between like your mother, I want you to be happy, or as your mother, I want you to be happy. In this case, we can use both and have a different meaning. When I say like your mother, I want you to be happy, the the meaning is that I agree with your mother, right? But as your mother, when I say as your mother, I am your mother, right? I am fulfilling that role, and this is the meaning of as in the capacity, in a certain capacity, and of course, as here is a preposition. So, as your mother, I am your mother, and I would like you to be happy, right? Okay, we are going to move on to some uses of as with certain verbs that I think are interesting. You will see them elsewhere in Unit 12, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And this is point B on page 69 at the bottom of the first column, right? And this question of being appointed as curator of the collections. And Birchfield explains to us that that this is relatively uncommon, right? To use these verbs like choose, consider, count, deem, proclaim, and I am skipping elect, right? Because if you think about it, we don't say in English elect as something, right? So you search as and no, nothing. But choose as is possible. Let's see if they have an example with choose as. I think I had checked that. Yes, choose banking as a career, right? Count as a friend, uh, proclaim as the leader, right? Or they chose him as a leader. And then he says that there are certain verbs, similar verbs like accept as, acknowledge as, class as, regard as, and treat as, in which as is practically obligatory, right? It's always going to be there. Now, this as may be casually omitted in certain expressions like she used to come regular as clockwork. This is very informal, right? You would naturally say as regular as clockwork, and it was soft as butter, but rather we prefer as soft as batter, right? That sounds very unusual, right? Very, sorry, I got this page accidentally. We're going to skip point number 4 and point number 5, right, from as. So we're going to go to page 70. And from page 70, we're going to discuss this as and when, when. I hope there's an entry here. Which means whensoever, when you are in doubt, right? Well, and Birchfield tells us this was first recorded in 1945, which means this is rather new, right? And it can also be used to mean when possible. And I think this is the meaning you're most acquainted with. So Oxford says used to say that something may happen sometime in the future, but only when something else has happened. So we'll decide on the team as and when we qualify. So very much like that idiom, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'll tell you more as and when, as soon as I can, right? This is used elliptically, right? So we can say also, as Birchfield says here, when possible or eventually, right? We also have another expression in number 7, which is as from, and here we have as of, beginning on that day, right? A partir del 12 de mayo acá, as of yesterday, a partir de ayer. Now, a brief comment is merited by phrases like as of now or as of today. And Birchfield tells us that this is well established in Standard English in the UK and elsewhere, right? As from last term, Oxford has a new center. So as from, no problem, right? This is Standard English. But what is interesting is the next one, the comment for as how in point number 8. And what I want to discuss from this one is the use of as how, meaning that, right? Before that, he gives us an example for as how, which is we shall see sometime how heretics come to turn the grounds of faith wholly upside down. You see that this is old English, right? So disregard that. But I took these concerns for my own, as how could I not, right? So this is rather formulaic, sorry, um, meaning how could I not, right? But I want to discuss, as I said earlier, it is the phrase seen as how, right? And Birchfield tells us that this is to be distinguished from part of UK and US dialectal use, right? Seen as how the captain had been hauling him over the coals, meaning because, basically, right? Now, he tells us that this structure is not standard, right? Seen as how. Maybe you have seen it. I think it is rather frequent. Or as how, right? Now, the other structure that is really important is in number 9, as if and as though, in which he tells us that the subjunctive where is preferable, right? Because we're talking about hypothetical, uncertain, and not factually true. So one of the examples is it was rather as if the capital city were a vast pan. It was as if Sally were disturbed in some way, and it goes on, right? As though, he tells us, operates in the same way. He was looking at her as though she were for sale. and more examples. But then he tells us that it is as well to keep in mind that in a great many contexts, the question of where was does not really arise. So we fell into step and, as usual, talked as though 8 months were minutes from Virginia Woolf, or don't nag me, he said as though they had been married a long time ago, or as if he had exceptionally high specific gravity, or as though she had remembered. So this question of whether we use was or where is not that relevant. Remember that was is going to be always more informal than where. But what merits further discussion is the distinction between uh, as though he is, or as though he were, right? And Birchfield tells us that as if and as though are followed by the past tense because it isn't a real possibility, right? Um, so one of the examples is, it's not as though he lived here. But we can also use the present tense. I suppose you get on pretty well with your parents. You look as if you do, right? And possibly you remember from language 1, no, sorry, language 2, in which we saw the example, he acts as if he is, he acts as if he were, right? And this distinction is will always be there. He acts as if he is, or as if he were, right? So remember that in both cases we're saying he is not, right? But where is more remote, so it is less likely, and is apparently more likely, right? So this is a minor degree of certainty that you can show in English, and in some cases when expressing, some other cases when expressing hypothesis, right? In Spanish, you can't. Se conduce como si fuera. No hay otra posibilidad. No como si es, right? Podemos sí decir parece que es, right? Okay, point number 10 is about as per, which is a very, very frequent, a phrase that is very frequent in American English, though Birchfield considers it slang, right? As per usual being the most frequent. I haven't checked here, so let's see as per and see if the dictionary has an explanation. As per norm, as per usual. Well, they say informal, right? So everyone blame me as per usual, meaning as it normally happens, right? As usual. There's nothing to it, right? Or the work was carried out as per instructions, following instructions, right? So it seems that the dictionary believes this phrase is more neutral than as per normal, as per usual being informal, right? Okay, I would like to comment on point number 11, which considers as such. And he gives us an example that is, the black people of South Africa have no objection to sanctions as such, provided, provided that only business firms are made to suffer. So Birchfield is telling us that actually what we want here is in principle, and it seems quite right to me. In principle means um, there's no reason why this should not be so, right? Or should not be done in principle, right? In principle, there's nothing that human can do that a machine might not be able to do one day. This is another meaning, right? In general. So the other example, in the example, sorry, as such, no objection to sanctions in principle rather than as such, right? Um, Now, he comments also on the expressions, and in principle can also mean in general, right? They have agreed to the proposal in principle, right? That's a very typical use of in principle. Let's go to as to, right? Or as for. With respect to, he says, this is rather old when referring to people, as to myself, right? Or as to such and such a person. Um, and you can also, of course, say as for you, as for your mother, right? But this actually survives in the language, right? And though it was used in the past, I believe that this is very current, right? Let's see. Oh, what happened? As to, no. Okay. maybe under as, right? Yeah, or in the proposition entry. Well, no. Well, neither as for, there it is, as for something or for somebody, right? Which is very, as for Joe, as for food, as regards this or regarding, right? That's very frequent in the language, right? Um, and something Birchfield tells us is that as to can also be followed by subordinate questions, right? As to whether, sorry, as to, I said as for, right? As to whether you should write a second examination paper or not, meaning as regards that, right? That's a very good use of as to. Um, now, it seems Birchfield doesn't like this because he says in most other circumstances, though, as to is best left unused, right? Don't worry because this is very, very frequent. Now, point number 13 discusses something that we need to focus on, and I like the language that he uses to talk about it, right? Two words, as or like, the two words are often interchanged like hockey sticks, right? And they're mistaken in their roles, right? As should be used before adverbs, as in, there are times, as now, and prepositions. He acted well again, as in Henry VIII, right? These are adverbial uses. And like should be used before nouns, noun phrases, and pronouns uh, when it is a preposition. So, as your father, we have the same example I mentioned earlier. As your father, in this case, this is a role, right? Like your father, I agree with him, right? The similarity. Now, before we go to like, there are some expressions with as that I think are useful, right? Um, well, one of them is as and when, right? Used to say that something may happen sometime in the future, but only when something else has happened. We have mentioned this one, right? We'll decide on the team as and when we qualify, and we said we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, right? Um, but I think yes, as it were is one that we have not mentioned, right? As it were, used when a speaker is giving his or her own impression of a situation. So teachers must put their brakes on, as it were, when they notice students looking puzzled. Uh, we tend to translate this as por así decirlo, right? Because it is a kind of catchphrase that doesn't say a lot, right? Um, and in American English, we have this phrase as like as not. Let's see. As like. No, they don't. There's not an entry for it. Let's see. No, we don't have an entry for this one either here, right? Let's see if I search for it like this. As like. Well, it is very slow. Okay, we'll move on. And then we go to like, right? Let me see if as a conjunction we're missing some combinations that might be interesting. As yet, it hasn't been published as yet, and as yet unpublished report. Uh, well, and this is an idiom, right, which is very beautiful. You might as well be hanged or hung for a sheep as for a lamb, right? When you may be punished for doing anything, right? Whether it's big or small, right? Okay. It may be as an adverb. No, that's all there is. Okay, so let's go to like, right? We're going to go to the entry for like on Fowler, and that is page 458, right? Um, and Birchfield shows kind of a temper when he introduces like as a conjunction, right? Which is the wrong use of like. Uh, and he says the great schoolmaster's view of the construction was expressed with characteristic verve. Every illiterate person uses this construction uh, um, daily, right? So actually, he was citing. I realize now he was citing Fowler, right? Uh, Saying that in this phrase, like you have done, like is wrong because like is a preposition in most cases, right? Like mine, like his father, nothing um, like chicken, right? And of course, you get the entry, right, for like. Now, this use of like, Birchfield tells us, quoting somebody else, Jerome, right? No, sorry, he's quoting the OED, right? The Oxford English Language. Uh, this is now considered vulgar or slovenly, though examples may be found in recent writers of standing. Slovenly, careless. This is one of those adjectives. So I missed the L. This is one of those adjectives that end in ly, right? Slovenly behavior, slovenly appearance, untidy, right? Dirty. Um, and further ahead, in these uses of conjunctional like, that is to say, like as a conjunction, and let's go back. The dictionary had an entry for like as a conjunction here, right? Like she did, like intended, like I said, which are phrases that you know are very frequent. But there's information about this, right? And actually, initially, we discourage this. And of course, the dictionary tells us that this use of like as a conjunction is informal, which is maybe non-standard for certain speakers, right? Um, Further ahead, Birchfield tells us that the use of like as a conjunction is dismissed as illiterate, what Fowler had said, vulgar, sloppy, right, informal. Well, today we would say informal because that language is very, very strong, right? And then Birchfield goes on to tell us in which cases it is normal to find like when we should find as, right? When we mean, he says first, when we mean in the way that, right? They didn't talk like the other people talk. Instead of saying as the other people talked. This is Martin Amis, a very reputable writer, and there's Penelope Lively later on, and the New Yorker, right? Lots of examples. Um, but these must have, according to him, escaped censure or reproach, right? Another use of like instead of as, when you mean as if or as though, it looks like it's still a fox. This is very frequent, but we should have said it looks as if. Well, we should have said a more conservative view of grammar would say it looks as if it's still a fox. Another use is when we are using the verb like or, sorry, say or tell, like we said, like you say, like I told you, instead, as I said, as I told you, right? And the last use in which like creeps in when you mean in the manner of. And the example is you call us mom and dad like you always have instead of as you always have. Now, all of these uses, the four uses in like, when it means in the way that, when it means as if, when we use this with verbs like say and tell, or in the manner that, in these four cases, like is informal because it is functioning as a conjunction, and we should have used as instead. Uh, that I insist from a conservative point of view of grammar, right? Um, Still, he says that I like this, that like as a conjunction is struggling towards acceptable standard or neutral ground, right? As if it were knocking on the door of standard English and begging to be allowed in, right? And then he says, the distributional pattern suggests that the long-standing resistance to this omnipresent little word is beginning to crumble. Notice that he finishes the paragraph with crumble, which um, emphasizes the idea that This is a losing battle, right? Like is here to stay as a conjunction. This question of the distribution of patterns means that the patterns in which like appears instead of as, right? Um, um, and the long-standing resistance to like in this position is because, well, precisely what we have been talking about, that people resist the use of like in its function as a conjunction, right? Or conjunctional like, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Now, as a preposition is unquestioned. Drink like a fish, right? These are standard phrases, idiomatic phrases. He drinks like a fish. You mean he drinks a lot. Something sells like hot cakes, so it sells very easily, and it fits like a glove, so it fits perfectly, right? um, and here we can go back to other uses of as that may be confusing. But first, he comments on this use of like that may be ambiguous, right? In Kingsley Amis's, notice that he goes Amis's, right? The title of his novel was Take a Girl Like You, and he says this could be interpreted as a girl, for example, you, right? Or a girl who resembles you, right? Um, Such as you. And that's why he is telling us that maybe we should use such as instead of like, right? Um, an example is good writers like Dickens, for example, and possibly it is better to say such as Dickens, right? And it sounds, it seems to make sense, doesn't it? Um, okay, I'm looking at other examples I wanted to add. Uh, we have already commented on she acts as if. Uh, Okay, let's move on to point number 3, which is this parenthetical use, which is hated, right? Hate is a very strong feeling, right? And this use of like as a catchphrase, maybe you could say, as a filler, right? A catchphrase, evening all is a catchphrase, but this is more like a filler, right? When you just want to say something. Like is typically an example, but it's not given here, right? A filler. Um, okay. They don't give like as an example, but when you say, well, the example here is very good, right? Father grew quite uneasy, like for fear of his lordship's taking offense, right? And Birchfield tells us that this was an occasional device, sorry, that was unexceptional. That's a very beautiful word, unexceptional. Unexceptional. Am I missing any letters? Ah, yeah, was not. Unexceptional, right? So unremarkable. These are synonymous. Um, so nada del otro mundo, right? So quite ordinary. Um, but then he tells us by the mid 20th century, however, its use was incoherent and prevalent, right? It is a vulgarism of the first order, and it is a token of unsophisticated speech. So, well, clearly something he doesn't like, and possibly if you pay attention to it, when somebody uses like as a filler excessively, it may come across as a bit annoying, right? The person may come across as annoying. Now, there's some idiomatic phrases he tells us in point number 4, right? Like always, like anything, like places, like crazy. Um, but we don't get to see this. Like, no, I don't think that there's an entry here. This, no. Let's see if I look it up like this, just in case. As always, right, is what they want. Well, these are just in passing. Now, I would like to comment on this point, the point that follows within number 4. Sorry, no, this is like as a noun, right? So, like here, like as a noun. And he tells us, in 1988, I was upbraided by a Scotswoman for writing, "Who has not seen the likes of the following?" And well, this upbraid means to chastise, como reprender, lo retó, le tiro de las orejas. Um, uh, the likes of, he says, I turned to the OED and noted with satisfaction that the use of likes as a plural noun was listed there with illustrative examples from 1787 onward. All right, and then he has an example from Penelope Lively. Remember, I told you this is a writer he regularly quotes. Grow up, Birchfield. All right. Now, this use of the likes of is very frequent, right? Also, and the like similar, right? Or such like as here. The likes of, right? Though it is entered as informal, right? She didn't want to associate. She didn't want to associate with the likes of me, so she didn't want to be with people like me, right? Finally, like as a verb, um, I think this is a very interesting point that you may not have noticed. He tells us, in English-speaking countries where will regularly replaces shall, that is to say, virtually everywhere except in England itself, I would like is used instead of I should like. So standard, maybe sophisticated English, RP says I should like rather than I would like. Yes, possibly something you had never paid attention to. Okay. Uh, I'm going to go to point number 2 from like as a verb on page 460. And he tells us that this use, like for plus a complement, has not spread its wings outside America. So the example is mhm. He told Highbridge he would like for the writer to do something. I'd like very much for you to meet him, right? This use is not in the OED, right? Um, so it is restricted to American English. Let's see. I never checked. Like for. Well, I should check the verb like actually. Oh, the verb. Ah, there it is. North American English, right? I'd like for you to do something, right? North American English. Okay, and point number 3, like to or liked to, which is a home kept American import from Britain. What does this mean? Well, it came over with the Mayflower, right? They still use it in America, but in Great Britain they stopped using this like to. Um, which is very unusual, right? The evening liked to have been a tedious evening. She liked to faint it just now. I liked to had a fit, right? These are very, very unusual. Okay, so that's all from Fowler, and maybe there's some idiomatic phrases with like that we may not have mentioned, um, such as like as not. Let me just go to the search box. Like as not. We might find it more easily. No. There it was. Like as not, right? Which means probably, right? She would be in bed by now. Like as not, right? Well, another typical phrase with like is like father, like son. Um, and another one is like so. Let me see if it is here. Like so. No, we don't have it here. As in, it means in this manner. The candles are arranged like so, right? The candles are arranged like so. In this manner, right? Well, the likes of we mentioned, and people of a like mind. Right? People of a like mind, or possibly you're already thinking about this, like-minded people. You're never gonna argue with like-minded people, right? That's very easy. Like-minded. I'm checking other notes. Okay. There's some other phrases that are really nice in English with like, right? Such as, um, well, remember that we mentioned some from Fowler, right? When we said, drink like a fish, sell like hotcakes, it fits like a glove, scream like hell is another one, fight like the devil. These are collocations, right? Scream like hell, fight like the devil. What else? Work like a house on fire, very hard. Uh, it hurts like anything. It hurts a lot. Right? It hurts like anything. And here's another one. Sorry. She talks like a book. Talk, well, like a book. Right? She's very knowledgeable. Uh, all right. I apologize for the long entry, right? Remember I told at the beginning. That is all for As I and Like from Fowler and a little bit from elsewhere. Thank you all. Bye.